My past occupation wasn't very legal, to say the least. I used to work in an underground organization that specialized in the creation of artificial animal species. I know what you're thinking. Like one of those ligers that are a cross between a lion and a tiger. The answer is no. That kind of crossbreeding is a child's play compared to what we did. I'm talking about mixing insect DNA with bird DNA, and then sprinkling a little bit of reptile in there for good measure. You know, the good stuff. Let me give you a little bit of backstory so we're all on the same page. Our organization was known as the Progenitor Consortium. Our original goal was to secretly plant new species of animals into environments which were suffering from overpopulation, deforestation, you name it, in attempt to restore them. Looking back, it's pretty clear that this goal was not viable. I mean, it didn't make sense to begin with. We shouldn't have recognized that doing this would create the opposite effect within the natural order, but we were on a roll. So the organization quickly became a hub for creating creatures to suit all sorts of uses. Companion critters, weaponized monstrosities, you name it, we had it. It was a good life, too. I made many friends and the pay was incredible. None of us really questioned the morals of what we were doing, and why would we? Life under the Progenitor Consortium was fantastic. Over time, though, our efforts became stale. There weren't as many buyers anymore. I remember that day during our lunch break, when our director, Griffin Moon, came to the group during our lunch break to offer us a new project. You know, it's crazy, he said. I never thought in all my years of creating such fantastic creatures that I would get, well, bored of it. My group looked at me, and then back at Moon. The guy was a tad unhinged, but he meant well. His statement piqued my interest, so I replied, "You want something exciting? Well, the boys and I have been working on this new one. Very deadly. You see, we used the body of a gorilla, and then gave it a rhino's head. Upscale it a little, and voila, an instrument of destruction. We have potential buyers," and Griffin cut me off. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. We create marvelous things that are used for any purpose as a buyer sees fit. But they're still just animals. Tools for people like us to use to our liking." He leaned in closer, putting his scarred hands on the table my group and I were sitting at. He had been involved in a lab accident caused by his uncontrollable ambition a few years back. I'm talking about creating something conscious, something that can think and feel like any person can. We wouldn't be working as manufacturers anymore. We would be working as gods. I looked down at Griffin's hand as it clenched the table. I had to make sure he was serious about attempting to do the impossible. "You're talking about creating a completely artificial, living and breathing human. Griff, look. You're unbelievably ambitious. Hell, it's the reason you were elected as our director, but this is insane. What if it's too smart for its own good? Human intelligence is dangerous. We, of all people, know that." The guys at my table started chuckling. Griffin looked down for a moment. His eyes darted side to side briefly, and then were fixed on me again. "If you change your mind, I'll be waiting," he said. Back in my apartment, I reflected on what Griffin had said. He was right. We'd be gods. We would be the first humans to ever artificially create one of our own, completely from scratch. Hell, we could make it better than us. We had the potential to create the next steps in evolution, something that could use its superior intellect for the greater good of humanity. At this point, my mind had completely wandered off until I looked over at the birdcage that sat next to my bed. In it lived one of my most prized creations. An amalgamation of bat DNA spliced with Jackson's horned chameleon. I created a creature that resembled a dragon. I named him Stanley. He was a sweet little thing. Observing Stanley as he fluttered about in his cage, playing with the toys I gave him, reminded me of one of the most important things when crafting a new species. The less intellect you give it, the less potential it has to betray you. What I said back in our laboratory still had value, and I needed to make sure Griffin understood that. I was about to fall asleep until my phone started buzzing. I checked to see who it was and saw that Danny, my closest colleague in the lab, was trying to call me. I groggily answered, "Danny, I looked over at the clock. It's 12:30 in the morning." Danny's voice was frantic. Something was clearly wrong. "Niall, you need to get over to the lab right now. Several tissue samples are missing. I swear to you I put them in the right place before we closed up shop. Griffin's gonna kill me." A wave of nervousness washed over me. He was right. Griffin would be furious if a bunch of his prized tissue samples were missing. The guy was very particular about how the samples were handled. "Yeah, I'll be right over," I said, just before hanging up. I quickly got dressed and bolted out of my apartment. The PC's lab was only in use during the day, but the location was scheduled within the back alleys of its home city. And no, I'm not giving the lab's location for all you pesky urban explorers. When I arrived, I was greeted by a very nervous Danny, who unlocked the unmarked door within the alleyway. I told Danny to calm down and that we'd track down the missing tissue samples. "You don't understand, man. This is my job here. This is all I've ever done for the past 4 years. Everything must be organized. There are thousands of these samples and they're a real pain in the ass to get." We went to the storage room, where the PC kept all of its tissue samples. The walls were lined with freezers which housed them, organized by the different classifications of animals. After a quick inspection, Danny confirmed that there were 5 tissue samples missing: chimpanzee, dung beetle, dolphin, planarian, and tardigrade. I'm telling you, man, I put them in the right place. Danny was on the verge of tears. I believe you. This is an oddly specific group. It's not like there's just a shelf from one of the freezers you misplaced. Each one missing seems like it was selected. I told him, "Look, there's no way someone got in here. Hell, the only people who ever know about the consortium are our clients. We've never disappointed any of them. What would be their incentive to steal from us?" Danny asked. This was no client. I thought back to my conversation with Griffin the previous day. A new project. Something conscious. Then it hit me. "Danny, do you remember when Griffin came to our table yesterday during lunch? You were listening to him, right?" "Yeah? Why?" "He proposed we create something new. Something intelligent. Look at the samples stolen. Each one has to fit some kind of role, right? Do you remember who else was at the table with us?" Danny shook his head. I don't," he said. That was when we were interrupted by a loud noise emanating from somewhere outside the room. Danny and I both stopped what we were doing and bolted towards where the noise came from. The noise, which sounded like a large metallic bang, sounded off again. This time we could tell that the sound was coming from the basement. Danny and I ran towards the doorway that led to the basement, hoping to find out what the noise was, and if it had anything to do with the missing samples. "Wait!" Danny yelled. "We need some protection from whatever broke in. I'll be right back." Danny ran the opposite direction to our armory. About a minute passed before he brought back 2 pistols. Better safe than sorry. I nodded, took one of the pistols, and made my way down towards the basement. The loud banging had stopped, and in the silence, I could make out a faint, unfamiliar voice.
So I'll be the next step, right? I'm the successor.
I was confused. Successor of what? My thoughts were interrupted by a much more familiar voice. Yes, my child. You are the peak of it all. The most evolved organism on the planet. Use the knowledge I have bestowed upon you and make this world a better place. Chills went down my spine. It was Griffin. What the hell was he talking about? More importantly, who or what the hell was he talking to? I turned to Danny, having no idea what we were supposed to do next. I say we get out of here. This is next level shit, man. Look, Griffin had to be the one who took the samples. I don't want to get involved in his little shop of horrors down there. You remember the weird shit he was talking about yesterday? Danny was adamant about leaving, but the thought of warning Griffin about attempting to pull off what he apparently ended up pulling off still sat at the back of my mind. I hid my gun from sight and proceeded towards the basement entrance. Looking back, it was a bad decision to reveal myself from the dimly lit stairway. It was a bad decision to drag Danny down there with me, and it was an absolutely horrible idea to confront whatever the hell Griffin had made down there. I turned the corner to see Griffin standing next to one of our larger hybrid chambers, which is what we called the test tubes we build our monsters in. What I saw within that chamber made me feel very uneasy. It was an almost perfect humanoid figure, the only difference being a lack of any visible genitalia, and no hair anywhere on its body. "Griffin," I called out. "What in God's name are you doing?" Griffin turned around, violently, looking very sickly. "Niall, Danny, the hell are you two doing down here?" He looked horrible. There was a wire stuck in the side of his head, being fed straight into the cranium of the humanoid figure within the chamber. The being's eyes were locked on me. It looked scared.
"Father, who are they?"
It pointed at Danny and me. "They're colleagues. Don't worry. They won't hurt you," said Griffin, looking directly at us. "Right." Griffin shifted towards the front of the chamber, looking as if he was guarding it. "We're not here to hurt anybody," I said. "We've noticed some samples went missing and came down here to find them. I assume you took them to make this thing." The being within the chamber cocked its head, its brow lowered, seemingly to show anger at my statement.
"Then why did you bring guns?"
it said. I froze. How did it know we had guns? They were tucked away, completely out of sight. Griffin instantly became enraged. "So, you came here to stop me? How dare you? After everything we've done together, after everything we've worked for in this organization, you come here to kill me? You conniving bastard." "Griffin, calm down," I interrupted him. He was completely delusional. We thought the lab was being robbed. I looked at the wire attached to his head. Whatever he was doing to give this creature life was obviously killing him. I slowly revealed my pistol and tossed it to the side. Danny did the same. "We're not going to hurt you, or your friend." I paused. "The thing in your head. What is it doing to you?" I asked. He seemed to calm down, but still kept his distance from us next to the console of the hybrid chamber. "It's how I created him. I call him Anubis. I discovered that splicing chimpanzee, dolphin, and my own DNA created a volatile reaction when in the chamber. His mind is too powerful and requires a temporary external power source. This is how I'm keeping Anubis alive at the moment. But soon, he will be ready to exit the chamber and live as his own being. I've done it. Griffin was completely oblivious to the fact that this thing was feeding off of him. I had to end this before Griffin was killed. I dove for the gun I had thrown away only moments earlier. "No! Damn you, Nile!" yelled Griffin. His strength was fading. He could barely keep himself upright. I unloaded the entire clip into the hybrid chamber. Anubis screamed in agony and then crashed into the glass of the chamber. The chamber collapsed and crushed Anubis. Griffin was detached from the creature, but had grown so weak that he struggled to keep his body up off the ground. I ran over to him, trying to prop him up on my shoulder. "You fucking idiot. I'll kill you for this." The words barely escaped his mouth. He needed to get to a hospital immediately. While Danny and I carried him out, the remains of the chamber started to shift. Out from the literal tons of debris rose Anubis. A conniving smirk plastered across his face.
"Your people seem to have a knack for meddling with things you do not understand. I should be grateful, though, since that is the very thing that led to my creation."
Anubis' voice had changed. Originally sounding like an innocent child, scared for his life, it now represented a cold and calculating menace.
"It was hard, really, keeping that childlike demeanor."
He laughed to himself.
"What a fool. I don't think you realize the knowledge that man bestowed upon me. I know everything about this world now. Look at him, barely functioning."
I was stunned. All of his wounds had healed. There must have been the Plenarian in him. Those little critters have the most advanced regeneration system of any living organism. Danny hadn't seemed to realize it, though, so he took it upon himself to blow Anubis' head off with his own pistol. The humanoid flew backwards, with the remains of his head painting the floor a crimson red. His body convulsing as I slowly began to rebuild its splattered head. Danny and I took the time to run out of the basement and up the stairs, with Griffin propped between us. A loud shriek came from the basement, followed by a series of high-pitched clicks. "The hell is it doing?" yelled Danny. If the stolen samples are anything to go by, that's the dolphin portion. I think he's using echolocation. "What the hell were you thinking, man?" Danny said to Griffin, half joking. Griffin emitted only a few mumbles before his head dropped again. We heard an enraged Anubis reach our floor. The clicking sound continued and grew steadily closer. While we ran, a thought lingered in my mind. That thing could not be allowed to leave our facility. God knows what kind of destruction he would cause out in the world. "Danny, get the hell out of here, and take Griffin to the nearest hospital. I'm killing this thing." Danny hesitated, but nodded his head in compliance, gave me his gun, and headed towards the exit with Griffin. When Danny and Griffin left, the clicking stopped, and a voice called out,
"That's odd. Now I can only feel one of you,"
said Anubis, sounding irritated.
"No matter. Let's take this time to have a little fun."
I ran into the armory to acquire more firepower. I grabbed a tactical 12-gauge shotgun and loaded it. The clicking continued. Anubis was toying with me. I situated myself outside the entrance of the armory. The clicking was coming from all around me. It was impossible to find the origin. That was when I heard tiny thud noises coming from within the ceiling. Great. The bastard had crawled his way into the air ducts. I waited for a moment. Suddenly, Anubis crashed to the ceiling about 30 feet down the hallway I was huddled in. What I saw next was terrifying. Anubis was on all fours, with the other half of his head still working to regenerate. His eyes hadn't yet reformed, rendering him blind. The clicking sounded off again, followed by his head turning directly towards me.
Before you so graciously remove my head again, I want you to realize it did not have to come to this. It would have been much easier for you to leave this place before you entered the basement. Lower your weapon. There is an ending where you get to walk away from this.
I kept my gun locked on his torso. If I shot him enough times, I could scatter his parts across the hallway. There'd be no way in hell to come back from that, right? What do you want to do when you leave this facility? Tell me something that'll stop me from ending you right now, I said. Anubis cocked his still reforming head and answered.
That's the thing, Niall. You can't end me.
I fired 9 double-aught shells into Anubis, cutting him off mid-sentence. What remained was the bloody pulp of his head and torso, with his arms and legs scattered in different directions across the floor. Right, I said, mocking the desecrated corpse of Anubis. Just to be completely sure I killed him, I used the emergency airlocks within the hallway to seal it off from the rest of the facility. The way our facility works was that if there was ever some sort of breach, we could close off the specific hallways and flood them with neurotoxins. The rooms connected to the closed-off hallways or equipped with secondary doors. That gave me a way to exit the armory. I found the panel for opening the neurotoxin vents and activated it. I quickly left the consortium laboratory and gave Danny a call, telling him Anubis was dead. When I got back to my apartment, I noticed the time was 3 a.m. Was I really gone for 3.5 hours? I went to sleep, hoping I could go and check up on Griffin the next day. When I woke up the next morning, I tried to call Danny. He was usually at the lab before any of us, so it was odd that he didn't pick up. I got dressed and stepped outside my door, still barely awake. When I went to close my door, I noticed a small note taped to the outside of it. The handwriting was barely legible, but when I figured out what it said, my heart sank. It read, "I'm very impressed with how you dealt with me last night. You are a warrior. That is why you are still alive. Griffin and Danny were not as lucky. Be grateful." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. How did he regenerate from being a scattered pile of body parts? How did he survive the neurotoxin? How did he leave the facility? How did he find Griffin, Danny, and me? And most importantly, where is he now? When I made it to our facility, I noticed 2 employees standing outside the alleyway door. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. "We saw the security footage. Your fight with that thing that the director conjured up. When you left the building, it managed to build itself back together within the hallway you blocked off. We had no idea how, but the neurotoxins did not have any effect on it. It then managed to rip off one of the airlock doors with its bare hands. We have no idea where it went. There's a team in there now, cleaning out the neurotoxin. Nobody's allowed inside yet." I stood there, completely dumbfounded. Anubis was capable of removing an airtight door that weighed almost a ton. He survived being blown into pieces, used echolocation to hunt, and didn't even need to breathe. There's one thing still unknown: his intentions. I decided to take the day off and recuperate in my apartment. When I reached my door, I saw that another note was attached. I went to read the recognizable yet barely legible writing from earlier. There were only 2 sentences. "I'm going to have some fun in your world. Thank you."
I've been working in a rural area at a coal-fired power plant in South Carolina for several years now. It's my first real job out of college, and the pay isn't bad for someone in their late 20s. I've just bought a small house in the country, gotten rid of some toxic things in my life. My girlfriend and I are getting serious. I guess you could say things are looking up. Like everyone, I have good days at work and bad days at work. It really just depends on your attitude. I'm never really one to complain, and I love getting my hands dirty. Very dirty. A base layer of oil and grease mixes with coal dust and covers almost everything in the lower levels of the water-filled slump holes and various motors and pumps. Ash from the boiler covers everything in the upper levels of metal grating hundreds of feet up. And it's the hottest place I've ever been. A summer day of 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside equates to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit inside the plant. And some places are up to 180 degrees or 190 degrees Fahrenheit. The walls are covered with cracks and cobwebs, dark corners, and marker graffiti from decades of workers coming and going. And the rusty metal I-beams and catwalks surround me in a claustrophobic nightmare. Day shift is busy and hellacious, due to all the preventative maintenance being done, offline repairs, and people trying to act busy. But night shift is a much slower paced time to work, with much less management present, and well, people aren't using as much power when they're asleep. On day shift, there are hundreds of people at the plant. On night shift, however, only 3 to 4 people are walking about in the large structure, so my night shift routine has incorporated a half-walking walk around the plant, coffee cup in one hand, flashlight in the other. It's loud and atrocious to look at, but it can lull you to sleep if you're not careful. Ask anyone who has ever worked 12-hour nights, and they'll tell you that sleep deprivation is no joke. I've been so sleepy that I've fallen asleep standing up. I've imagined people entirely, hallucinations that help me through long nights with familiar faces that disappear when you take a second glance. That's enough to wake anyone up. But one particular night, my sleepy stroll was interrupted by a short fall with an abrupt stop. It knocked the wind out of me. I tripped over a discarded piece of scaffold, falling onto the concrete floor. I hit my head, but I was wearing a hard hat, so luckily it didn't really hurt. In fact, I felt just fine. It hurt my pride more than anything. But after that scuffle with the floor, something strange happened. I continued my stroll through the early morning hours until a figure walking past one of the water heaters caught my eye. The heaters are about 10 feet wide and 20 feet tall, with chains hanging from valves, and large pipes twisting and turning in a spaghetti mess of hot insulation. Needless to say, I stopped for a moment, shined my flashlight, and thought, must have been my shadow. However, no amount of trying to reenact my movements could reproduce the shadow. I gave up. I figured maybe I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. It happens. That was a few months ago, and things went back to normal. Relatively. But 2 weeks ago, I saw the Nightwalker. At least that's what I named it for the simple fact that it's always walking around the plant. I would see it walking around all hours of the night. The first time I saw it, thinking it was a normal person, I actually confronted it. I asked it what it was doing, only to have it stop and look at me for a moment. It stared around me, as if its eyes couldn't train on me, but they tried to. It had a tall and robust figure, like a seasoned fighter. It walked stoically, with indifference. It was fast, and I could sense that it was angry toward me. It would mutter to itself, sometimes singing. This thing really creeped me out, to the point where I did my equipment checks as quickly as I could and left the area. This thing had overpowered my mind, and I was frightened every time I would see it now, to the point where I hid around corners and waited for it to leave. It wasn't violent toward me directly, but I could tell that it didn't want me there. It's the not knowing what it might do that bothered me most. The other guys at the plant thought I was making it up, and ignored me when I would talk about it. Even my girlfriend ignored me when I tried to describe the eerie phenomenon. One night I was finished with being ignored. I figured I would have to face this entity or quit my job. And the money, spoke too loudly over my fear. So the time came when I would normally see the Nightwalker, and I waited for it. I got a sledgehammer from the tool locker and waited behind a large I-beam for my target. To be honest, I didn't want to use the hammer. I just had it for self-defense. And then I saw it lurking around the pumps, wading through spiderwebs to sneak around the dark depths. I charged it, running, yelling, hoping to scare it off. But instead of running, it stood there, watching for me. It was motionless as I got closer. 25 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, hands shaking, palms sweaty. I took a swing at it with the sledgehammer. I expected resistance, but I hit nothing except air. I paused, confused, and waved my hand right through the being. It was like a hot smoke, and startled, it ran away. I won, I thought. I scared off the Nightwalker. So I went to the break room triumphantly to brag about my success, but no one listened. And the more I was ignored, the more angry I got, until I stood right in the way when someone tried to leave the room. To my surprise, they walked right through me. The feeling was hot, like stepping into the shower when the water temperature is slightly too high. I spent hours wandering and trying not to believe it. I retraced my steps, so to speak, trying to find anything that could have caused this. Is this real? Am I asleep? Am I dead? And then it hit me. As I looked into a large puddle of water on the floor, I could see the reflecting shimmer of a screwdriver sticking out of my chest. I must have fallen on it, and my first thought was, how long has that been there? Followed by the urge to defecate, but the inability. My stomach dropped as I realized the gravity of the situation. No wonder my girlfriend is ignoring me. No wonder the other guys wouldn't listen. The Nightwalker isn't the thing that's been lurking the plant. I am.